What happened to the man who pulled off the only unsolved case of air piracy in the history of commercial aviation? Follow me down the rabbit hole about D.B. Cooper. Hello, friends, and welcome back to the rabbit hole. I'm your host, Danny, and today we are talking about D.B. Cooper. Thank you, Raju, Kaden, and Randy for requesting this episode. I was excited to learn more about D.B. Cooper. I honestly thought there would be a whole lot of conspiracies, so let's dive in. But of course, before we get started, I love to thank our sponsors. So thank you, Wise Wolf Gold, for sponsoring my podcast. If you guys want gold and silver delivered straight to your front door for as little as $50 a month, go to rabbithole.gold right now. On November 24th, 1971, a nondescript man in his mid 40s hijacked Northwest Orient Airlines Flight 305. This man went by the alias Dan Cooper. Cooper was a quiet man wearing a business suit with a black tie and a white shirt and brown shoes. He used cash to buy a one-way ticket on the flight from Portland, Oregon, bound for Seattle, Washington. While the flight was waiting to take off, he ordered a bourbon and soda, and he seemed calm, cool, collected. He handed the stewardess a note, which she initially just put into her pocket, thinking this is some businessman trying to give me his number, which I bet in the 1970s was like super common. So she was like, cool, whatever. She put it in her pocket. Seeing that, he was like, Miss, you might want to read that note. The note stated that he had a bomb and that she should sit next to him. When she sat next to him, she asked to see the bomb, and he opened his briefcase and showed her what looked like 8 sticks of dynamite, although I've seen some sources say 6 sticks and some sources say 4 sticks. We're going to go with 8, tied to a battery with wires kind of going all over the place. He then ordered her to write down and deliver to the pilot that he demanded 4 parachutes, 2 front and 2 back parachutes, and $20,000 in $20 bills delivered to him on the plane when they landed in Seattle. That's equivalent to about $1.5 million today. And by requesting 2 sets of parachutes, it implied that he was going to take a hostage with him, which ensured that he wouldn't get faulty parachutes when they did bring them because they would not risk the life of a hostage. He also stated that he wanted all of this done by 5 p.m. Mind you, the plane took off in Portland at 2:50 p.m. The flight attendant took these demands to the flight station to have them relay the message to the guys on the ground. That's when Tina Mucklow took the seat next to Cooper. So initially, it was a different flight attendant. Then she took the seat and she became his liaison moving forward. The flight from Portland to Seattle is short. It's only about an hour long. This meant that the people on the ground really needed to scramble to get all the things that he was demanding. I mean, 4 parachutes and $200,000 is a lot to get in a short amount of time. So this meant that air traffic control needed to keep the plane in the air for as long as possible. So they kept the plane in the pattern circling the airport for about 2 hours. But Cooper seemed to know the area because as they were flying, he looked out the window and said, looks like Tacoma down there, which is on the route from Portland to Seattle. He was also told that the parachutes were coming from McCord Air Force Base, and he noted that that's only about a 20-minute drive from SeaTac Airport, which both statements are correct. After the initial demand of parachutes and cash, he added to it. So he wanted the fuel trucks to meet the plane, and the passengers were to remain in their seats on the plane while the stewardess, Tina, went off the plane, got the money, and then brought it back on board. And then he would let the passengers off the plane. Seattle Police Department and the FBI were contacted and informed of the situation. Tina described Cooper as nice. He didn't seem nervous and he wasn't cruel or nasty to her in any way, which to me, I'm like, this is the way to hijack a plane. Like, be a nice guy. Just put out your demands. No need to hurt anybody. They didn't do anything wrong. And actually, Tina even asked him at one point, like, why did you choose our plane? Like, do you have a grudge against our airline or something? And he was like, no, it was just the plane that fit what I needed. It just happened to fit the time and probably the aircraft type of what he was looking for. They officially didn't land until about 5:45 p.m. With Cooper's permission, they parked the plane on a partially lit runway away from the main terminal. They did this like if the bomb does go off, they want to minimize the casualties as much as possible. But in November in Seattle, it's already mostly dark, if not completely dark, by 5:46 p.m. So they needed some sort of lighting. So this partially lit runway worked perfectly. Only one airline representative was permitted to approach the plane with the money and the parachutes. Tina was then allowed to get off the plane, grab the money, and she walked it all the way back to Cooper in the very back row of the plane. Once he had the money, he allowed all the passengers to exit the plane as he said he would. And as they did, he inspected the money because he wanted to make sure they were not marked bills. There was some sort of issue with refueling. I don't know if there was actually an issue or if they like made an issue with refueling because they had to bring in like three different fuel trucks to actually refuel the plane. And this caused a delay in the plane to take off again. While they were trying to figure that out, Cooper had his own issues. He had asked for the money to be brought to him in a knapsack, but it was brought to him in a cloth bag. So he had to improvise some sort of way to transport the money. So what he did was he cut out the canopy of one of the reserve chutes and stuffed the money into the empty parachute bag. Then, becoming impatient with the refueling process, he gave his flight plan to the pilots in the flight station. They were to set course toward Mexico City at the minimum airspeed they possibly could without stalling and should not fly over 10,000 feet. The landing gear should stay deployed. He did not want them to ever bring it up. And he also wanted the flaps to be lowered to 15 degrees and stay there as well. Then the cabin was to remain unpressurized. Not only that, but the rear exit door of the plane was to remain open with the staircase extended. He wanted them to take off like that and for it to stay like that for the duration of the flight. But this demand was met with a little bit of backlash. So officials from the airline were like, this is unsafe. You really do need to pull up the ladder. You really shouldn't just like leave it down. Cooper knew that it could happen, but he didn't even fight about it. He just wanted to get off the ground. So he pulled up the stairs and he decided that they would just lower them when they were airborne. He did require one of the three flight attendants to stay on board to assist in the operation of all this during his flight. With the requirements of what Cooper was demanding, the plane would not have a range of over 1,000 miles. So the pilots actually told Cooper, hey man, like we'll fly like this, but we can't go all the way to Mexico like this. We're gonna have to stop somewhere along the way and refuel the plane if this is the way that you want to fly. Which is fine, we'll fly it like this. It's gonna be weird, but we don't have the range. So they all agreed, Cooper was involved in the discussion, that they would stop in Reno at the Reno Tahoe International Airport to refuel. Finally, at about 7:40 p.m., the flight took off again. On board was Cooper, one flight attendant, Tina, and the two pilots and a flight engineer. Two fighter jets, F-106s from McCord Air Force Base, and a Lockheed T-33 trainer all diverted from a mission that they were already doing. So they were already in the air, flying, doing whatever they were doing, and they were instructed to follow the flight. They had to follow in like an S pattern because the plane was flying so slow, and they also didn't want Cooper to know that the plane was being followed. After takeoff, Cooper instructed Tina to lower the stairs out the back exit. Tina was super nervous about this. Mind you, Tina was brand new. She was the lowest on the totem pole on the flight crew, so she like did not have as much experience as some of these other flight attendants did. When he told her to lower the stairs, she did know how to, but she was worried that she would be sucked out of the plane if she did. So she told the pilots that. The pilots were like, "Hey, just come up here, grab the emergency rope, tie yourself to a chair, and then when you lower the stairs, if you get sucked out, then you won't actually get sucked out. Like you'll be tied in." Cooper did not like that. He didn't want her to go to the flight station for any reason. He wanted her to stay there. So then she was like, okay, well, can I have like, you already cut out this canopy from this parachute. Can I have the cords and tie myself to the chair that way? Like some way I want to secure myself to the aircraft. And he was like so fed up with her. Like just lower the stairs. So finally he was like, you know what? You go to the flight station. I'll lower the stairs myself. When you get there, like on your way, go ahead and close the curtains between coach and first class and don't ever come back here again. You just go up there, you stay up there with the pilots. And she did. As she was walking up there, she turned around to close the curtains as he instructed her. And she saw him like tying the parachute with the money, the parachute bag with all the money to his waist. And that was the last time she saw him. A little bit after 8 p.m., somewhere between Seattle and Reno, Cooper jumped out of the back of the plane with two parachutes and the ransom money. The pilots felt the plane pitch forward, which forced them to trim to get the plane back level again. This is how they knew he had jumped out of the plane, but they didn't put two and two together right away. Like it was more like a hindsight thing because they're like, oh, trim it down or trim it up or whatever to level the plane. In his FBI interview, one of the pilots said that this occurred over the suburbs north of Portland. which would make sense because he boarded the initial flight in Portland. So maybe he lived in that area, or maybe he just had like a getaway car or driver in that area. Something about that area kind of felt right. Just after 11 p.m., the crew landed the plane safely in Reno. The FBI, state troopers, sheriff, and police all met the plane on the ground. They didn't know if Cooper was still on board or not. They didn't know what type of situation they were coming up to, so they were being very, very cautious. The pilot, the captain, searched the cabin. He determined that Cooper was no longer on board, which I think that they did have like an inkling that he wasn't there anymore. They decided, yep, he's no longer on board. Then the FBI, the bomb squad, everybody got on the plane and started searching it before they declared that the cabin was safe about 30 minutes later. When the FBI learned of the hijacking, they immediately opened an investigation and they called it NORJAC, which stood for Northwest Hijacking. This investigation lasted years, decades even. They interviewed hundreds of people, tracked leads across the nation, and searched the aircraft for evidence, of course. The FBI recovered about 66 fingerprints, Cooper's clip on tie, the tie clip, and two parachutes. They didn't really have a whole lot to go on, especially when you think like 66 fingerprints. That's cool that they recovered that many, but also there were 36 passengers, six crew members, and however many people had been on and off that plane prior to that flight. So these fingerprints could belong to anyone, but they had them. They did figure that Dan Cooper wasn't his real name, but criminals usually use names that are close to their own name. So the FBI ran the initials through their database and found a guy in the region who had committed petty crimes in the past, and he went by the alias DB Cooper. Daniel Boyle Cooper had committed crimes in Portland, and he lived about an hour and a half from Portland in the Dalles, Oregon, a small town on the border of Washington and Oregon along the Columbia River. They went to his house the night of the hijacking, hoping to catch this guy red handed, $200,000 in hand, and then arrest him because they figure by the time he had done the hijacking, jumped out of the plane, then he has to get back to his house. There's no way he's there. So they go to his house, knock on the door. Who answers the door? DB Cooper. He's home. They're like, well, this guy can't be our guy because our guy wouldn't have made it home in time. There's no way. So this isn't the guy. This DB Cooper is not the correct Dan Cooper that we're looking for. But the press had gotten a hold of this name, DB Cooper, and they just like ran with it. They never corrected that his name was actually Dan Cooper and not DB Cooper, and that's still what we call him today. The search for him was massive. So many things determine where Cooper could have landed. When he actually jumped out of the plane, what was the wind speed? When did he pull the ripcord? All these things change the trajectory of like his landing point by miles potentially. The Air Force even loaned the search an SR-71 Blackbird so they could photograph the whole area, and they did 5 passes up and down of the entire flight path and still had no luck. By the 5-year anniversary, they had considered more than 800 people as suspects and eliminated all but 24. The FBI's favorite suspect was Richard Floyd McCoy Jr. because he had hijacked a plane and escaped via parachute 5 months after Cooper's hijacking. Although this could have just been a DB Cooper copycat. He hijacked a United flight and demanded $500,000, and he used the exact same tactics as Cooper. A little bit about McCoy. So he served 2 years in the Army before he returned to his state of Utah and to Brigham Young University. He was married and had 2 children at the time of his hijacking. He was in the Utah National Guard, he was an avid skydiver, and he dreamed of being in the FBI one day. After his hijacking, he was picked up by a hitchhiker who later turned him into the police. The FBI ruled him out of the DB Cooper case, stating that he didn't match the description given by the flight attendants and other reasons, although they didn't specify the other reasons. But he does look an awful lot like DB Cooper. So the fact they ruled him out because he doesn't match the description, to me, doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I'm wondering if they ruled him out because of the lack of escape plan when it seemed like Cooper had the whole thing planned out meticulously. But everything else seemed to match. It seemed like Cooper had military training of some sort and McCoy was in the Army. But McCoy also bragged to his friends about how easy his hijacking was. So it makes me wonder, like, wouldn't he have bragged about both hijackings if he got away with one of them? He did end up getting arrested and put in jail for the hijacking he did commit. And I'm not sure if it's real or not, but more recently, allegedly, they tested DNA from Cooper's tie against DNA from McCoy's son, and it was a match, allegedly. But this could have been faked. Like, this could just be like fake news on the internet. But apparently, McCoy's kids also came out and said that their dad was Cooper, but didn't want to say anything until their mom had passed because she was involved in the crime and they didn't want her to get in trouble because Richard Floyd McCoy Jr. was in jail. So could she have been the getaway driver for McCoy this whole time? Like, was this like a Bonnie and Clyde situation? Cooper's true identity and fate remains unknown to this day, officially. The FBI eventually concluded that Cooper probably didn't survive the jump from the airplane, and they have suspended active investigation into the case. The case is closed due to lack of new evidence. There are a few other things, though, that I wanted to include before I get into some of the theories. In 1980, a small portion of the ransom money was found on the riverbanks of the Columbia River near Vancouver, Washington. It was just buried there in the sand. They know it was the ransom money given to Cooper because most of the money had serial numbers beginning with the letter L and was photographed on microfilm by the FBI before they had given it to Cooper. So they could verify that the money that they found on the shore of the Columbia River was the same money that they had given to Cooper. Like they knew for sure. The most accepted theory is that Cooper died. Many experts believe, and the FBI believes, that he died in the jump. This is due to the fact that he jumped into a freezing rainstorm over a heavily forested area. And they also say that he wasn't wearing the proper gear, although there are reports that say that he was wearing wraparound sunglasses. So most reports say that he was wearing sunglasses, right? You have this sketch of this man wearing sunglasses and not wearing sunglasses. Both are said to be D.B. Cooper. However, some reports say specifically that he was wearing wraparound sunglasses, which maybe they like connected in the back. This would be very useful in the jump. Although we do have to keep in mind, by the time he jumped around 8 p.m. in the Pacific Northwest in November, it was well dark outside. So sunglasses would have limited his vision, but it also would have been really helpful for the wind while he's free falling and for potential like branches in his eyes if he's falling into a forest. So lack of proper gear, I feel like, is not a valid reason to be like, yeah, he died. Maybe a coat, but he was wearing a suit and he did take off his tie so it wouldn't like hit him in the face or anything while he was falling. Experts believe that he had no idea where he was landing, which is another reason why they think that he's dead. This theory is neat. It like puts everything together really neatly, but they never found a body. They never found a parachute. They didn't find the money. There's no trace that someone fell out of the sky and died. But there's no trace of him at all. So of course there's always the option that he survived and escaped. Like what if he knew exactly what he was doing? The whole plan seemed really well thought out. He knew he should ask for 4 parachutes instead of just the ones for him because they would not give him faulty parachutes. He knew to ask for the plane to fly further than he needed, but ensure that it would go over the area in which he needed to jump. He seemed to know the area very well and how to use the parachutes because when Tina offered him the instructions for how to use the parachutes, he was like, no, I don't need those. Which, if you were on my TikTok live when I was doing research about this topic, I did say that he used one of the parachutes as instructions as he was jumping, which I found later was false information. It was compelling, but it was false. But if he had that much knowledge of what he was doing during the hijacking, wouldn't he have planned an escape route? Like, he wouldn't have just jumped and been like, okay, now what? So it makes you wonder, like, what if he survived the fall? Which is still totally possible, and then just went on to live a quiet life. Maybe he lived in a small town or in the woods. If he didn't spend too much money at a time, it probably wouldn't have raised any red flags. And like, what if he just went back to his regular life? So what if he lived in a small town? He committed this hijacking. He went back to his small town. He spent some of his money that he had stolen, but just didn't spend too much. It was average for him to like go down to the diner and buy a coffee. They're like, oh, this is just Joe Schmo from up the road. But really, this guy just committed the most legendary skyjacking ever. He wouldn't have raised any red flags. He could have just lived out the rest of his life quietly. And yes, the FBI had microfilmed the money that they had given him, but it was also the 1970s. They did not have the technology like we have now. So they might not have been able to disperse the information that they needed to, or been like, this is all the money, like, this is all 10,000 bills of what we gave him. Like, that's a lot of bills to go through and be like, oh, this is the serial number for this one. This is the serial number for this one. So if he did go to the local diner and gave him a $20 bill, which would be totally normal for him, they wouldn't have checked the serial number to be like, oh, this guy just hijacked a plane because they knew him. He was Joe Schmo from down the road. The money found in 1980 was found just 20 miles from where they suspect that Cooper jumped out of the plane, but in the opposite direction of where they were looking, which does lead us to our next theory. What if the money on the bank of the river was buried as a decoy? He buried that money because he did seem to think of everything, right? So he buried the money there, just like this small amount. I saw some sources said $5,800. I don't know. I couldn't verify that. But if it's here, then they won't look over here. They'll be looking in this direction. He knew that they would be after him. What if he buried it there and then headed to a remote area of the country where they wouldn't think to look for him? Some people think that maybe he fled to Mexico or Canada. I think personally, if we're going to go with this theory, I would believe Canada over Mexico because Washington is on the border of Canada. And also, he specified for the pilots to fly him to Mexico. If he thought of everything and then he jumped out right when he was still in like Washington, potentially Oregon, like right there at that border, he could easily get to Canada and escape. Canada has a lot of land where it's remote. People aren't just like in everywhere of Canada. So what if like flying to Mexico was a red herring to throw authorities off his scent? I don't know. This theory isn't as popular as some of the other theories, but it's still an option. And lastly, could it have been the CIA? Cooper could have been a CIA agent who stole the money because the CIA needed to use the money for some off books mission. So there's this theory out there that the lottery is rigged and every winner is just a CIA asset. And they do this so that way they can keep their really top secret missions a secret. This way, they have the money. There's no money trail of what they're doing. They get the money. It keeps the public's interest, like, oh, somebody actually won the lottery. But nobody really knows somebody that's won $1 billion in the lottery. I mean, $1.7 billion was just won on the Powerball, and nobody knows who won it. But if it was the CIA, they can then turn that money into some sort of mission. They keep it all secret. They keep it off the books. There's no money trail. Then the rule followers in the agency wouldn't know about it. And in turn, they couldn't stop it. This also creates this plausible deniability and avoids any red tape bureaucracy that they might face if they ask the agency for that much money. If it was the CIA that stole this money, this could explain the detailed plan, the calm nature of Cooper, and how he seemed to have this military type training. This could also explain why they never found him. The FBI was searching, but in the wrong areas, because you have to assume that if the CIA stole it, the whole FBI was not in on it. You got these guys, these boots on the ground, they have no idea. They think they're actually searching for a hijacker. You got maybe one guy in the FBI, if anybody in the FBI, looking for this guy. The CIA knows what the FBI is going to do. They know their tactics, their checklists. They know how they search for people. So they know exactly how to avoid the FBI. And also, then the CIA is there to pick up their guy on the ground when he lands and escape with the money. And that's why they never caught anyone using the money. It's compelling. Either way, DB Cooper has become such a legend, mostly because of the mystery around it. Like, where did he go? Did he survive? Is he still out there? Many people have gone hiking in the area trying to find Cooper or his money. They have referred to him in so many movies and TV shows like Loki, Prison Break, Without a Paddle, and Breaking Bad. I mean, I'm sure there's so many more too. There are bars, Airbnbs, and street performers that are DB Cooper themed. In fact, I have a picture of my husband and I with a street performer in Seattle who said he was DB Cooper. I'll share that on social media if you want to see. It's kind of a cute picture, but not the point. The point is, they even have this conference called CooperCon where a bunch of people get together to talk about what they think really happened to DB Cooper, where he is, did he die, is he alive? And of course, it's hosted in Vancouver, Washington, a weekend in November. It is emceed by the host of the DB Cooper podcast, The Cooper Vortex, and they all just like get together and hang out. But how many people are so obsessed with DB Cooper? I mean, You've got this guy that's got this whole podcast dedicated to it. How many YouTubes? How many videos? How many people are still talking about DB Cooper 50 years later? It's wild to me. He has created such a legacy because he got away with the impossible. So you got to tell me what you think. Did he die? Did he survive? Where's he at? I'd love to hear your opinions. And of course, until next week, my friends, stay skeptical and I will see you all then. Hey friends, The Rabbit Hole is an independent podcast written, hosted, and produced by me, Danny Mercy. Special thanks to Lindsay for research and writing. If you love the podcast, please leave us a 5-star rating and review wherever you're listening. Follow us on social media at rabbit.holepodcast and visit our website at stayskeptical.com for everything else.